If you're watching this on YouTube, you might have noticed that this episode is a week delayed. But if you want to get early access to our episodes, consider becoming a paying member. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. Thank you for all your support. Andrew Sullivan is originally British, though his accent suggests that he lived in America for quite some time. He is an influential journalist and political commentator. A former editor of the New Republic, he showed great courage in publishing unfashionable views which he felt deserved an airing. And I saw him recently on a TV talk show in which he stood up bravely in the face of 3-against-1 bullying. I was curious to meet him after hearing him on a podcast describe me as a very unpleasant person. Since he never met me, I thought it was a bit harsh. In my experience, a judgment that somebody is unpleasant seldom survives actually meeting them. For my part, I found him affable and intelligent. I hope you enjoy our conversation.
My current guest, who is the great Richard Dawkins. And he's an evolutionary biologist, author, and public speaker. And from 1995 to 2008, he was the Charles Simonyi Professor of the Public Understanding of Science at Oxford University and is currently a Fellow of the Royal Society and of the Royal Society of Literature. Among his many best-selling books are The Selfish Gene, The God Delusion, and his 2-part autobiography, An Appetite for Wonder and A Brief Candle in the Dark. More importantly, he has a Substack, The Poetry of Reality, which I thoroughly recommend to all of you and hope you will go check it out and sign up and subscribe and support. He's often been out on a limb. He's not someone who seeks to say the things that are always popular, which makes him not so popular, which also might have been Bry back when Justin Brierley was on the show, not recently, not that long ago, a few weeks ago. I said something about him, which in retrospect I realize I would like to apologize for. But you can see it's not that bad, actually. I said, we were talking about the rise of new atheism, and he had a book, this Justin Brierley, his name was, about what he thought was the rebirth of religion, which I was a little skeptical about. But anyway, he said, I was going on about the sudden revival of the new atheists in the early 21st century. And I said, probably occasioned, this is Mike quoting me, quote, by the emergence of fundamentalist and violent Islam, there was this massive, sudden, real hostility to religion in the public square. We're talking about the new atheist friends of mine, my old friend Hitch, God bless him. And he'd hate me saying that, but anyway, I don't care. And Sam Harris, my friend Sam.
I don't hate it.
Okay, Richard. And then Richard Dawkins, this is the thing, the most unpleasant person, at least from a distance, one could imagine. Now, we're going to close the distance today, and I apologize. I'm just saying it's not like you went out of your way to make friends and love everybody up to make your point. You've always been very straightforward.
I did hear that. I was a little bit puzzled because you said nice things about Hitch and about Sam Harris. And then I was the most unpleasant. I thought it was just because you'd never actually met me.
It's true. I've never actually met you.
Yes. But if I come across as unpleasant in writing, then I need to know that. And I'm curious to know, I accept your apology, obviously, and thank you very much, but I'm curious to know what motivated you in the first place? There must have been a reason.
I've just observed you. It's less in your writing, actually, which I don't think is that way at all. It's just you're a little prickly and clear in public, which, of course, I am too. I get it. As I say, I don't really frame what I want to say in terms of everybody's sensibilities. And I'm not particularly upset if I offend someone for good reasons. Not bad reasons, but for good reasons. Like they disagree.
I'm interested in this. Do you think that clarity itself seems threatening to some people? Because I'm wondering whether that's what you're saying.
Yes, I do. I'll give you one classic example. When you say something in an argument, they say, would you preface that with saying, in my opinion? And I'm like, well, it's self-evidently my opinion. I'm saying it.
Sure. Yeah.
But they're nervous of the directness of it. The clarity of saying something that they find difficult. They want it cushioned emotionally or some verbiage around it to make it not seem so threatening.
Well, I saw you talking to Jon Stewart.
Oh, God.
And I thought that was a disgraceful episode of piling in on somebody. I thought you stood up to it magnificently because all three of them were just hammering away at you and not letting you finish your sentences, all that kind of thing. And so, yeah.
That was a horrible experience, I have to say. But from my point of view, because I didn't feel I did very well, but I think the sense that when you're public, you're speaking, having an argument, to make it immoral to make certain cases, to make you a bad person if you believe this, that, and the other, as opposed to the other things. That, I think, creates an atmosphere where it's really hard to have frank and honest conversation.
Of course.
And I think, yes. I don't know about you, but maybe we'll talk about this, but you know, I was brought up in an Irish Catholic family where we just said what we thought all the time. And if we got mad about it and had a fight about it, so what? We blew over, we dealt with it. I grew up in a political culture in Britain where I loved debating. There's nothing more I liked than really having a good old fight with somebody I like. I mean, I know it's weird. I don't want to talk about this too much, but the person I fought all my high school days with was Keir Starmer. We were in the same grammar school together. And we were very blunt and very straightforward. When Americans hear the British Parliament, they're also a little, whoa, because of the clarity and animosity and clarity of it all.
Yes. Did you hear that wonderful line of Dennis Skinner, by the way? Dennis Skinner said, half the Tories opposite are crooks. The Speaker said, withdraw that remark. All right, then, half the Tories opposite are not crooks.
That's brilliant. He's a great... Dennis Skinner, if listeners don't know him, because they probably won't, a great Labour Party parliamentarian. Is he still in the House of Commons?
I don't know. He was known as the Beast of Bolsover.
Yes.
And he was certainly very blunt, yes.
Yes, and I appreciate bluntness. I find when people start being squishy with me or condescending to me, or I just get irritated by it, and I'd rather we just had it out, you know? But that's just my temperament, I think. And I've rubbed people up the wrong way. I spent the first 10 years of my life in America just shocking everybody I talked to because I didn't learn. Americans are very private. They incredibly don't like offending and upsetting at all. I think this is part of why wokeness has taken off, is because no one wants to say anything to anybody else. You know, it's all too unpleasant.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's a bit. There are some things you can say and some things you can't. I mean, you can criticize Christianity, but you can't criticize Islam. I mean, there's that kind of double standard, and you can criticize transracialism, somebody like Rachel Dolezal, but if you criticize transsexualism, then you get dumped on.
Yes.
And so I think it's not a uniform fear of being blunt. I think you can be blunt in certain directions, but you absolutely mustn't be blunt in other directions.
Yes, you can say anything about white people on Twitter as a general principle, and nothing will ever. But if you said even a third of it about another racial minority, you would be regarded as an outright bigot.
Yes.
It's funny, but I think that's also socialized, right? Because you grow up and live in your own social circles, and for them, slowly you learn what's taboo, what isn't taboo, and you never break those taboos, right? And if those taboos are actually what the other half of the country actually think, then you have a political problem.
Yes.
You have breakdown, really, of any democratic conversation. And that's where we are in America. I think we're in much greater trouble than the United Kingdom on that particular front.
I fear so. I think it's dividing. The country is dividing. I won't actually forecast a civil war, but it's getting worse.
Well, the language that people are using, I don't think that kind of language of life and death, the end of America as we know it or not in one election, that kind of language has not been heard since the 1850s and 60s in this kind of apocalyptic way. And the mutual hatred is an incomprehension. I think that's what we're talking about here. The absolute incomprehension of a mutual respect. I remember going to dinner parties in New York City, for example. I went to one which was very liberal. I won't talk who threw it, but there were a bunch of very liberal journalists, and I was there. And as an opening gambit, one of them said, would you think the world would be better off if Christianity had never happened, Andrew? I was like, but that's fine, let's have a debate about that, sure. But you would never ask that of somebody else of Islam or or Judaism. You'd be absolutely appalled to ask that. But somehow I have to defend this in a way. And I just was like, do you realize how if someone in a relatively religious state or relatively conservative small town heard what you just said, it would prove every paranoid fantasy that they have true.
Yeah.
But anyway, Richard, let's get back to you and your life. Tell me, who were your parents and how did they influence you in your life?
My parents were, my father was in the British colonial service in what was then Nyasaland. It's now Malawi. And he was an agricultural officer, just recently married to my mother. And he was called up to go to the war in Kenya. And so they traveled up to Nairobi. And I was born fairly soon after they arrived. So I was born in Kenya, but my early childhood was spent in Nyasaland. And then we moved to England when I was just 8. And we've been in England ever since. I've been in England ever since.
What was that transition like as a child to go to have sort of been brought up in a completely different culture and then suddenly be reintroduced to England?
Yeah, it was like England, I presume, England in sort of Edwardian times, because it was sort of, had servants, cook and gardeners and things like that. It was not at all luxurious. I mean, we had no indoor plumbing, no electricity, that kind of thing. But it was sort of a strange mixture of old-fashioned luxury and a lack of modernity. And I wouldn't say that the colonial types that my parents mixed with were racist, but they were paternalistic. So the Africans were treated more like children. So that's a kind of racism. It's a different kind of racism from hostile bigotry, but it's patronizing.
Yeah, and how was the impact in coming back to England? How did that affect you? Because I
was a bit young. I was a bit young to register an impact. I mean, it was cold and wet and very different from the warm climate of Africa. I missed Africa. I wanted to go back. I was sent to boarding school. Well, first of all, I was sent to boarding school in Africa, actually. And that was a surprisingly good boarding school. It was an offshoot of the Dragon School in Oxford, run by an ex-master from the Dragon School, and had the same sort of ethos. And entirely white, of course. And then I was sent to prep school in Britain. And so I didn't see my parents for most of the year. The school holidays were shorter than the terms. And that's pretty hard when you're 7.
But not atypical for the son of a professional British.
That's right. Yeah.
What does that do to kids? How did it affect you, do you think, in your personality and your adulthood?
I don't know. I wouldn't wish to say it screwed me up. I don't think it did, but it certainly screwed some people up.
I've read my Orwell, that incredible essay, such were the joys, including an incredible title, but children are resilient often. And then, so tell me when your first real inklings of an interest in science began to attract your obviously prodigious brain.
My father had read science at Oxford, read botany, and so he was constantly really on the alert for scientific things to say, and we looked at wildflowers. He gave the Latin names to all the wildflowers and things, and we talked about biology, we talked about evolution. So I suppose that came from fairly early childhood, but I was never a naturalist, unfortunately. I was never a bird watcher or a bug hunter or a flower collector. I was more of a bookish type. I think my interest in science was books and the sort of philosophy of science. But I didn't really become seriously interested until university, actually. I was rather a late developer, I think.
And what was it at university that really seized you? That the moment when you were like, this is what I have to do?
It was the tutorial system at Oxford, where you get an hour with a tutor where you have to write an essay each week, and you have to go into the library in order to write the essay and read original research papers. You were not reading textbooks. So it was not a case of mugging up the textbook, which is what we did at school. But at Oxford, it was, here's a reading list of the latest research papers on such and such a subject. You've got to write an essay. and you do the pros and cons, you look at controversy, you argue this way and that, you form your own opinions. That was a revelation to me. I mean, that was nothing like school.
It was not just sitting down and cribbing something and regurgitating.
No.
It was a
No,
real
it was
cut and thrust.
Right, yeah.
And
That's
the thing
right,
that
yes.
the thing that I must say, having gone through the same system in a totally different, I was doing modern history, modern languages, but the experience of that tutorial where you're really on your toes, you have to be, and it's intimidating, obviously, hugely intimidating, but you get this vibe from it that anything can be looked at, looked over, picked up, and scrutinized, and it never ends because there's always something else to learn.
Yes, exactly. So you argue, discuss. It's the Socratic method, and I try to do it on Twitter with fatal results.
Yes,
they don't understand about discussing something.
No, this is exactly why what I was referring to before is I learned the hard way too on Twitter that you just can't. That it is the most emotionally laden, intellectually barren place imaginable. So that no reason comes back at you.
No, that's right.
And especially
when word discuss.
Especially when you are sorry, Richard, go on.
I very often end a tweet with discuss. And you can't do that. It's what you do in a tutorial. It's not what you do on Twitter.
Isn't this really about the change of our culture too? Because, I think there was a time where you could have that kind of conversation in public, discuss. You could have, I saw, you can go back to the 60s or 70s and see TV shows that are really quite sophisticated in terms of philosophers, the scientists they have on, as if it was understood that cut and thrust of this stuff, and also that ordinary people should understand what this is.
But polite. I mean, not aggressive.
Oh, no, very polite.
Civilized. Yes.
Yeah. Every now and again, some barb would be hurled across the television studio, but in general, all in good fun. Tell me about, because this is a sort of question I've always wanted to ask you, which is, having learned the most rudimentary understanding in comparison with you, the process of genetic variation and natural selection, and regard it as a kind of extraordinary miracle. Fascinating how almost everything that we look at is part of that genetic expression. Did you ever have a moment like that? I mean, do you regard genetics in some kind of awe or wonder, or is it always an analytic?
The evolutionary process which gives rise to us is stunningly simple. I mean, it's just non-random survival of self-replicating information. And that it can produce the sort of prodigious complexity of a human brain or an oak tree is just stunning. You would think that something as big and complicated as a living thing would need an immensely complicated, well, of course it is immensely complicated in how it works, but not in how it's produced. It's produced by this extraordinarily simple process of random variation followed by non-random selection. And it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful that can happen.
Yes, to accommodate whatever environment it is being challenged by on an epic, grand, universal level all the time.
And the environment that it accommodates to includes other living creatures, and that's what makes it complicated. If it were just the weather, then it would just be boring. I mean, every animal would just become well adapted to whatever the climate is, and that's that. But because predators have to be adapted to prey, and prey have to be adapted to predators, each of them is escalating the process all the time. So one step up, cause the other step to go up, and each side must step up and step up and step up. And that's why you get these prodigiously complicated, beautiful things like lions and antelopes chasing one chasing the other and one running away.
Or varieties of birds of paradise and their mating rituals.
Birds of paradise, I mean, that's right. Seducing the opposite sex in all sorts of complicated ways. It's a kind of arms race. I use the phrase arms race advisedly there.
Yeah. And yet when you spoke about that, and when we speak about it in the language that we have, it all comes off very easily as if these particular animals are intending to do something, or that nature is moving in one direction from one place to another, as if there's some sort of brain behind it as well. But in fact, it's not. It's just it's the upshot of a gazillion different adjustments.
Exactly. It's a trap to fall into, to think that either that the animal is deliberately evolving or something like that, or that it's being drawn forward by some invisible force. No, it is mechanical. It just happens. I believe it happens all over the universe. If there is life elsewhere, it'll be the same kind of process will be going on.
And yet in that process on planet Earth, at some point, humans, as a separate species, developed a level of intelligence, of reasoning, that definitely gave them the impression that they were special. And do you regard...
Well, they are special.
Oh, they are. I know, but maybe they thought they were more special than they actually are. But I was trying to be slightly humorous there. But how special are we? How important is the emergence of consciousness because that does seem to be not just a random event, but some kind of seismic moment when the first species arrives that can understand the whole.
Yes, I don't think consciousness necessarily started with us. I mean, it almost certainly started with other mammals, but certainly there's an enormous leap forward with humans. And I think I would put that down to language. Once you have language and you have the possibility of cumulative advancement of a non-genetic type. So humans evolved by non-genetic means, they were evolved by cultural means. So each generation builds on the previous one, and it goes about 6 orders of magnitude faster than genetic evolution. So if you look at the evolution, I mean, it looks very much similar. It's just much, much faster. You look at the evolution of technology, of fashions, of languages. It just goes very, very fast. And that is unique to humans.
But when you expressed that, you said that human consciousness was a kind of step forward. We can't help this.
No, that's right.
But does that tell you anything? I mean, humans have been really resistant to the idea that history has no direction. History has no direction, and the universe has no meaning. Why do humans cling to that if that isn't true? Where does that come from?
History, I could listen to a historian saying that history has a direction. It might well have a direction. And I believe actually that you can make a good case for evolution having direction as well. That doesn't mean that it has a direction starting from bacteria and progressing to humans as a kind of target. That's all wrong. However, when you think of something like the evolution of a complex organ like the eye, it has to start simple and it gets more complex. It has to start crude and it gets better. It has to, I mean, the first eye would only have detected light versus dark. And forming an image like a modern vertebrate eye does is obviously a progression with direction towards improvement. No doubt about it, you can call it improvement. It really is. An engineer would recognize it as improvement. So I think there really is a kind of progressive direction in evolution, but it's not one that starts at the beginning of life and goes to the end. It happened recurrently over and over again. It happened perhaps on a cycle of more like 10 million years rather than billions of years.
So it might be possible, in fact, to imagine, if we take our current moment, that the accelerating speed that you describe of our achievements and of our civilization and of our technological powers and now of our artificial intelligence could, I mean, conceivably lead to a collapse of some kind, or global warming might lead conceivably to a collapse, in which case it all just starts all over again in a different context. That's what you're saying, right?
Well, it could easily do that. There's nothing like humans have ever happened before. I mean, we really are completely unique. And so, I mean, almost all other species have gone extinct. We may not, because we have the technology to, go to underground bunkers and hole up for time. On the other hand, we could drive the whole world extinct. So there's no precedent for this species.
Yes, there isn't, which is why, I mean, yes, I just have a million thoughts about that very possibility, because I'm nervous that our intelligence, our brains, as it were, which makes us a unique species, is actually going to destroy us, because it hasn't evolved at the speed of our nature, of our ability to handle it. That there are that our physical beings are the way our brains work, the way we have very deep reflexes from our evolutionary past that are just never going to be overcome. When you combine that with incredible levels of intelligence, you have destructive power that is almost going to have to happen.
It's been suggested that if you think about life throughout the universe, intelligent life throughout the universe, it may be that it's kind of winking in and out all the time. As soon as a civilization gets sufficiently advanced, it destroys itself. And so this means that the chances of happening to coincide with other civilizations, alien civilizations, is rather low, because each one only lasts a very short time after reaching the point where it could communicate at all. So you reach the point of technology where you can communicate, say, by radio, and then a couple of centuries later, you blow yourself up or destroy the world.
This is
like fireflies winking in and out all over the universe.
It seems a perfectly plausible scenario to me that is happening, but it would nonetheless, it induces in us humans. Well, what does it induce in us? A kind of sense of, you see, this is where, to some extent, I seek refuge in something called faith, because, and then we can talk about this, because obviously I respect enormously the scientific method and defend it in almost every context, ethical context, and believe in it, because I think it has been just this extraordinary success. And yet when you actually follow that to its natural conclusion, you end up with a scenario the way that you're suggesting. It just all seems to this human being just so pointless, so deadening, and so one reaches for something to give one hope. How would you respond to that sense of what religion is really? Solace in the face of nothingness.
The fact that something gives you comfort, that something gives you solace, is not any reason to believe that it's true. I don't think I need the solace you're talking about. I mean, I think well, there are two things. One is you gave the idea that there's something rather bleak and empty about the scientific worldview. That I strongly disagree with. There is something pessimistic about the possibility that we may destroy ourselves. I mean, that's a separate matter, separate from the idea that the very worldview itself is barren. It's not barren. I think it's beautiful.
I didn't mean to say that, Richard. I was saying simply that the feeling that one gets, if you could believe in the scientific method and reach its conclusions, then it's just, as you say, the truth of the world can leave a human being rather desolate.
Oh, no. I think it's marvelous. I mean,
tell us more.
The fact that you can understand why you exist, the fact that we have a theory which tells us how it came about that on one planet, maybe the only one, certainly on this planet, the laws of physics conspired to make life, and then ultimately, if not ultimately, at present us. That's an amazing thing. It's wonderful. I feel privileged to be alive to understand that. And so I don't go along with you in wanting to derive comfort from something else. I derive my comfort from that. But even if I didn't, I mean, even if I did think the world was desolate and empty and futile, I don't think I would derive comfort from faith, because it wouldn't ring true. There's no reason why, because it's comforting, it has to be true.
I think about Pascal a lot when I read you, because Pascal, of course, one of the greatest mathematicians in history, who also had some kind of revelation at some point in his life, which he writes about at great length. One of the phrases that always stuck with me from him was, he said he would look at the night sky and he'd say, "These great spaces terrify me." That there is something about the immensity of this universe that just left him in a sense of utter irrelevance, and it frightened him as a human being.
I get that. Looking up, especially in the tropics, looking up at the Milky Way, it's amazing, and you feel the immensity of the spaces, and you can always sort of hear a kind of eerie music. And yes, terrifying is not too strong a word in a way, but it's exhilarating at the same time. I mean, I don't enjoy terror for its own sake, but there's a kind of terrifying which is exhilarating. The contemplation of these enormous spaces, the contemplation of geological time, I find it exciting. I think it's part of what drives me, really.
I think what's exciting also is the thought that human beings have looked at that now for hundreds of thousands of years.
Yes.
And they looked at it without the knowledge that you and I have. Yes. They projected onto it an unbelievably complex system. They built rituals, go to Stonehenge, all these different places that attempted to kind of integrate the heavens into their own understanding of the world. Yes. Is that not in some ways also a kind of religious instinct? What does this all mean? Like. I mean, a spiritual instinct. Spiritual
You're playing with words.
Okay, well, I'm trying not to play with it, but I'm trying to understand the experience.
Well, yeah, you can define religion in however you like, and some people say that the feeling of, some call it spirituality, that you get when you contemplate the heavens, and you contemplate the complexity of life, and you contemplate the beauty of a tropical forest. They say that's a religious experience. For me, it's not, because I think of religion as being supernatural. And above all, I'm not a supernaturalist. So to me, part of the beauty of it is that all this magnificence and complexity is purely natural and purely has understandable, comprehensible physical causes. And that is beautiful. Einstein would have called that religion. And that's fine. I mean, you could redefine a word religion if you like. But I use it to mean a belief in something supernatural, which means mysterious and not demanding of explanation.
But contemplation doesn't demand explanation, does it?
I think it does. I think I'm always seeking explanation. I can't give explanation. I mean, things are mysterious, but mystery means you want to solve it. It doesn't mean you just lie down under it and say, "Oh, it's a mystery. Isn't that great?"
Or that you seek to be governed by it, as humans often have, or that humans would look at it and see gods up there, mythical gods, the Greeks. There are anything that we could project onto the heavens.
Yes.
But I think the experience, what I'm trying to get at really, is the experience of seeing oneself from the perspective of eternity, as it were, from the perspective of the sheer immensity of the universe, is a very human thing, probably something that other animals don't experience, because it requires a certain amount of intelligence to be that purely contemplative, unless we just don't understand how animals. Let me present you an idea which really comes from the man I studied at Harvard, Michael Oakeshott. He understood what you're talking about, this great trying to understand the whole, as it were, as a philosophical enterprise fundamentally, a sort of a kind of acceptance of that which we cannot know, but also seek to understand. And he didn't put religion in that category. He said that's the sort of the total category, and then there are different ways of thinking about the world. There is the scientific method, which is its own distinct way of understanding the world. There is poetry and art, which is another distinct way of understanding the world. He would argue also that there was historical understanding of the world, which had been finessed by the West, actually, in understanding how we could describe what happened in the past. And then there was also what he called the practical world, which was the kind of inherited wisdom of how you actually just get through your life. And it was in that category that he put religion.
Okay.
That in fact, religion is not about the truth, as it were. Even though the truth may be involved, it is about the practice of things that you do to make your life more in tune with eternity, as it were, what you understand to be eternity. How do you respond to that?
Yes, I've heard people say religion is not something you believe; it's something you do. It's something. It's a way you live. I have secular Jewish friends who are atheists, but they observe the Sabbath because it's part of the sort of discipline of life that gives their life pattern and order. But once again, it's not supernatural, and that's for me the big distinction, whether it's supernatural.
But one wonders if you could generate a practice like that without at any point having some kind of supernatural origin to it, in the sense that even, let's take Buddhism, let's take the practice of meditation, regular meditation twice a day. There's no God in Buddhism. Would you regard Buddhism as a religion in that sense?
Those varieties of Buddhism that don't have anything supernatural, if they really don't, I'm not convinced of that, actually. I mean, I think that some maybe they vary. You could have, and if you really value that kind of ritual, for example, I suppose we have rituals like, if we sit down to a meal, we don't necessarily say grace, but we may sort of have some kind of, especially maybe at Christmas or so, you have a certain ritual, or a birthday, you bring a cake in with candles on and you blow them out, all these sorts of things. We have plenty of rituals which are traditions. But there are rituals that are specifically designed to meet certain certain universal moments in a life, the birth of a child, the adulthood of a child, the marriages, the funerals, the things that bind us all in some kind of web together. And every human society has done this. Every human society has done this. The question is, and all of them in dealing with questions of life and death, birth, et cetera, they've all at some point see it as blessed by God, even if, or originating in something supernatural, even if in practice, you look in practice at Catholicism in Italy or something, you see people go to Mass in Italy, which is, I recommend, because as an Irish Catholic, it's a very different experience. They're going because it's what they do every bloody Sunday, and it's about family, and it's about ritual, and it's about words, and it knits a society together. And in some ways, I used to disdain that kind of easygoing religion. It's not seriously engaged in the truth of the universe. But as I go on, I increasingly respect that kind of thing, because it is something humans need. We really need this because maybe they do. Maybe. For me, it's no big deal. It's not. I mean, what's
but we're not all you, Richard. Most people are not you, and they feel grief at someone's death. They feel bereft at the randomness of life.
Don't get me wrong. Of course, I feel grief at someone's death.
I know.
That's quite different.
I know, but they need these rituals to make life bearable for them.
Yes. Well, maybe they do,
and meaningful for them.
But for me, the really important things are the truth. And so something like, I think that the hypothesis that there is a God or gods, the hypothesis that there's some kind of a supernatural creative intelligence lurking behind the universe is an amazing that's a fantastic hypothesis. I think it's false. But if it were true, it would be the greatest truth in the world. It would be an amazing truth. That's what really matters to me. Do you actually believe? It's one thing to talk about rituals and funerals and things. That's fine. You have that. But do you actually believe that Jesus was born of a virgin? And I'm guessing you don't. But
no. You've taken a leap there, which I want to take you back to. Do I?
Okay.
Because the virgin birth is a pretty esoteric part of a religion. But the core point is this. How do I explain this? Because in some ways I think we're talking out of different universes, because I'll be very frank, I have never not believed in God. I don't know how to explain that to you particularly. For me, as a kid growing up in rural England, and obviously I was marinated in Catholicism also, which from an early age. So I was taught that nature was God's creation, that there was something beautiful and meaningful behind everything I interacted with. It all had a kind of meaning, a beginning and an end. And I fell in love actually with God's creation, or with nature, like you. I mean, I found the beauty, and I loved being by myself in contemplative moments as a kid. This is why people thought I was weird, but I loved that. And the idea that this had no meaning, no origin.
It does have meaning. It does have meaning.
Well, tell me how it has meaning for you. Tell me, because I can't.
It has meaning. You can explain it. You can explain it in terms of the laws of physics, the laws of natural selection. It's magnificent that you can explain it. But
those aren't telling us what it's for. They're telling us how it works.
It doesn't have to be for anything.
I don't agree. Here's where we are, I think. I sort of feel in my bones, if this isn't for something, if there isn't something ultimately meaningful about this, then everything is meaningless. That is, I'm trying to explain to you. I'm not persuading. This is not an argument. I'm trying to explain better how the believer comes into the world. And there are moments, Richard, when I've decided I don't believe that. I mean, the idea that you always believe all of this instantly is not true. You go through lots of phases where you're bored silly at church. You don't want to go. You think the whole thing's a bunch of crock. They're all raping little boys anyway, and all the rest of it. You just want to just tell it all to go to hell. And then where do I go? Where do I go?
Well, you go and you look at nature, and you think those great thoughts that you just described. Then you go to church, and how mundane is church? I mean, it's so parochial and petty compared to the beauty of nature that inspires you to your feelings of religion.
Well, then, but
why mix
Richard,
it up with church?
Well, if you're a 14th century peasant and you walk into Chartres Cathedral, there are aspects of religion that are utterly sublime. I mean, I
get that.
Yes, you see that. So religion isn't
a great cathedral.
Oh, yes. It's the most extraordinary experience to walk in there and to be overcome by it in a way. And I can't imagine what it would be like centuries ago for people living in shit all day long to walk in there. It must have been like a spaceship of some extraordinary.
Think of the stained glass. I mean, we have color television, but they had nothing like that.
No, but they created something so much more beautiful and subtler than that, and so much more mysterious. But I agree with you. There's a lot. There's a hell of a lot of religion that is unbelievably awful, and what they've done to the Catholic Mass, for example, is a crime against humanity. But I would argue with you that I could take you to a Mass at the Brompton Oratory or something and show. At least you'd understand all this incense and music and ritual. You would appreciate it. I think you wouldn't necessarily think it was true, but you could appreciate it. In other words, the church isn't always dreadful. And for me, one of the things we did, like this time of year coming up anyway, May was the month of Mary. We would bring boughs of blossoms, flowers, all the natural newborn, and bring them all into the church, cover it all with this stuff. And if you look back in the history of Christianity in England, for example, you see so much of this integration of the natural world with a sense of community and meaning and beauty and transcendence. And while I completely respect your position, and I also don't believe my job is to persuade you otherwise. Pope Francis actually, you can't believe actually said this, but he did say this: proselytism is sacred nonsense, is what he said. That I respect you enough, Richard, not to want to do some ham-handed attempt to persuade you God exists. I'm just trying to better understand and I mean, I loved Hitchens, and we could talk about Hitch a little bit. He's such a thoroughly secular person in so many ways, with a lovely, if somewhat overdeveloped, streak of English anti-Catholicism and anti-clericalism. There's no one I would rather hang out with even though
No.
I'm a pretty clear Catholic. And he was so excited, by the way, when he found out I was giving a break after the sex abuse crisis. He was like, God, we're finally going to get you out of that awful cult.
If you'd been born in Afghanistan, you'd be a Muslim. I mean,
probably.
So, I mean, how can you take seriously the fact that you just happen to have been born in Ireland, and therefore, this is? I mean, you can be religious in the sense that you think there must be some spirit behind nature and the universe and things, but why go along with all the particular details of the religion that you happen to have been born into?
Because here's why. Because what you first described, that great, immense sense of meaning and godness, as it were, has to substantiate itself in history somewhere, somehow. I mean, it has to enter into human life, and therefore it's going to do so in a particular time and place, which is going to distort it and make it particularly weird or different in its own particular way, so that the teachings of the Buddha or the teaching of Jesus may well reflect the same underlying God, but be utterly different in their beginnings, because they're bound by human culture and human society.
So you don't believe the details that are peculiar to Catholicism, like, for example, the virgin birth and the transubstantiation of the bread and wine?
But I'm in my confessional here. No, I do not. I'll tell you this: I do not believe in the virgin birth as literally a virgin birth. No, there were lots of virgin births around that time in the Middle East, and what they really meant by that was an incredibly special person. And it was a sort of form of honorific. I think you have to look at history and see it in that context. Now, transubstantiation is a different question, because then you can reach just sort of a sense of mystery, that here we are reenacting a meal that Jesus had, where he made the radical statement to his disciples, his friends, that he took the bread and the wine of the Passover and said, "This is me. I am the bread. I am to be eaten. I am going to give myself up for you. I know this is happening." And we remember that by eating the bread again and believing in some way that he is a part of that process and that he is still there for us in that act of eating something physical, which is a way in which divineness is concretized into, is literally, that's what the word sacrament means. It's brought into reality in a very specific material way. So now you will say to me, I think, "Oh, come on, Andrew, you're being specious here. You know, this is all, you've rationalized your way out of all these difficult parts of it." Well, no, I've reasoned my way through some of the difficult parts of it. And out of the respect of what must be underneath it, what must be there, even if it's got a million barnacles on it, even if it's been abused by a million different wicked, fallen people, there is something there about the truth of the world and of one's life and death that I don't want to lose, having glimpsed.
I think it's so petty compared to the grandeur of the universe that you were talking about before.
It's not either or, Richard. It's not either or.
What you said sounds more like a Protestant than a Catholic. I mean, the bread and wine are symbolic of Jesus in some way, but... Well,
I would say then something more than symbolic. There's something mysterious unity with them, that because obviously we don't suddenly find it chewy with Jesus' flesh. I mean, we don't go back to lampoons of Catholicism from the 17th century. No, but there is something mysterious. I do not think that that is in any way incompatible with marveling at the wonder of the universe and respecting the specific discourse of science in understanding the material and empirical world.
Okay, well, we have to agree to differ on that, I think.
Okay, well, but I'm just saying that in some ways that's an experience. What do you think of the figure of Jesus, for example? Do you take the Jefferson view? Probably decent bloke, need to get rid of all the hokey pokey out of it, or what?
He was a very advanced moral thinker, way ahead of his time. This thing, turn the other cheek. Blessed are the peacemakers. This is something quite foreign, quite alien, and he was very far ahead of his time, as I say. So a very admirable moral teacher, but not the Son of God. I mean, nor doing those miracles, nor I mean, turning water into wine and walking on water and things. I mean, some people believe in that. I doubt if you do, but
I don't literally. I don't. But yeah. I do think that those stories were created and made in that period of time about all sorts of characters, that the world was a much more mysterious and magical place back then, especially as they told stories about people and as reputations grew. But I think, like you and Jefferson, I can still see through some of that to something quite extraordinary, a new thing in human consciousness, the idea that you don't just forgive your enemies, you love them back in this kind of radical. Now, here's what I would say about that, is that, again, to put that in the context of the development of human consciousness and intelligence, at some point the intelligence becomes so destructive that the human species has developed a sense that we could overcome this if we behave differently. And if we become selfless, if we become loving, if we abandon our core survival instinct, and then we can reach a future, then we can live in peace with one another and with the world. And that's what we're aiming for. That's what Jesus was really trying to say. If you don't, this will end in catastrophe. If you can, we can move forward and love one another. That seems to me a good message that you would probably agree with in general.
Yes, that's very good moral philosophy, but you don't have to be supernatural about it.
Let's get back to a little bit of science. Sex. You've what I think is ironic, you've never really been particularly exercised about this question, but as obviously it has emerged with critical gender and critical queer theory, that in fact there are not two sexes, that it's a spectrum, there are lots of little different sexes along the way, and that we have to recognize everybody, and everybody can be one sex or the other. Children are being taught at the age of 4 or 5, you can be a boy or a girl or both or neither or something else entirely. And you rather bravely jumped into the fray and said, well, that's just not true. What do you think is the truth about the sex binary?
Well, they use the word gender to mean something sort of fictive sex, and this is some kind of psychological fiction, which I'm not even very interested in. But to say that there are not two sexes is nonsense. There are two sexes and only two sexes and exactly two sexes. And this is true throughout the entire animal and plant kingdoms. And the sexes are defined simply and unequivocally by gamete size. There are large gamete producers, which we call female, and there are small gamete producers, which we call male. And there are very good reasons why it evolved like that. And throughout the entire animal and plant kingdoms, you have this clear division between the microgamete producers and the macrogamete producers. How sex is determined is different in all sorts of groups. In mammals, it's the XXXY system. In birds, it's the same thing, but the other way around. In birds, it's the female who's equivalent of XY. In many reptiles, it's done by temperature. In many fish, it's done by social dominance. So there are all sorts of different ways in which sex is determined, but sex is defined in one way only, and that's gamete size. And on that, every single mammal is either male or female.
There's no third. I'm just trying to think. For me, the very idea that there's something other than a sperm and an egg, that there's some third thing, a speg or an erm, is bonkers. But people feel, they tell us, they feel as if they're not really male. That they're
yes, I mean, and as I said, that's something that they call gender, and people vary along all sorts of dimensions, psychological dimensions. They may be aggressive, and they may be passive, and they may be ambitious, and they may be retiring. And you can place people along all these different psychological dimensions. And among those psychological dimensions are femininity and masculinity, and some you could say that that you feel you may be male, you may have a penis, you may have an XY karyotype, but nevertheless, you feel female, and that's okay. I mean, you go along with that. I mean, I'm happy to call people she if they want me to call them she. What I will not do is say you are the sex that you're not. I will not say a woman can have a penis. That is just nonsense.
Thank you. I just the idea that I'm saying thank you for saying that tells us quite where we've gotten. As a gay man, I am perfectly well aware that there are gradations of masculinity and femininity. I'm also perfectly well aware that that's just one one dimension of one's personality that barely scratches the surface of who you are as a person. And now, for some people, it may be more prominent than others. Fine. The key to me is that we should allow anybody to express themselves in whatever way they want. My hope is that everyone has the self-confidence to be fully themselves, however that is. But we don't have to deny reality. Now,
exactly.
So the way they do it is is this pronoun question. Now, the thing that you just said is, you are not this. Well, you, of course, is gender indeterminate. So the I and the you are already fine. They go for anybody. So it's only the third person particular, and only actually in the singular, because there's a plural third person, which is also gender neutral. So there's no reason for us to be talking about this at all. Every now and again, you'll talk about people in the third, but in conversation, it's usually you, me. It isn't a lot of he and she. I mean, there's some of that, obviously. It strikes me personally as someone who's always supported transgender rights and always supported a real variety of being a man and being a woman. There are a million different ways of doing it. I just don't get why you have to actually insist on moderating other people's language in order to feel okay about yourself.
No, that's right.
So let me ask you another really dangerous question, which is science and race. This is hugely, you're not allowed to talk about this at all, but generally speaking, let me give you my rough view, is that the world is divided between, obviously human beings spread across the world, in various parts of the world. They tend to just hang around and multiply with one another. You can see traces of this in the genetic makeup of people, in which there are some broad differences, but obviously huge, mainly similarities, but some differences in terms of various population clusters. You can see them in, whether it be Australia or whether it be Asia, you can see this. And in fact, we've proven that you can show it. Now, that doesn't always map onto ideas of race, which tend to be very hard-edged and hard-lined and very full of all sorts of anthropomorphic and biases that can be projected onto these things. But that also seems to me a little beside the point. If I can spit into a cup and find out that I am 99% from Western Ireland, then because I have a similar, I mean, obviously very similar to everyone in the world, but I have particularly in a few things similar ones to other people who've always been born in the West of Ireland. I don't get why that is so controversial.
No, I agree. I mean, the differences among the human species are actually quite substantial when you think about the external appearance. If you look at the genetics, we're actually a very uniform species. Rather surprisingly, there's a surprising mismatch between our external appearance, totally different in skin color and hair color and shape and so on, body shape, body size. But we are a rather uniform species genetically, and it looks to me as though a substantial part of such variation as there is concentrated in the externally visible bits.
Why is that for humans? Now I know why it's for dogs in a way. Like you can see when I take my little puppy now to a park and there's a Great Dane and he's a cattle dog, it always amazes me they recognize each other as possibly the same species. But other than dogs, I don't. Humans we do look very different. Yes,
we do. It's been fashionable among some biologists to say that race is a fiction, that it doesn't exist. And the reason for that is that there's much more variation within so-called races than between.
Right.
But nevertheless, such variation as there is correlated, and so you can pretty much infallibly, if you got 100 people and showed them somebody from Uganda, somebody from China, somebody from Norway, somebody from I don't know, Australia, an Aboriginal, nobody would have any trouble whatever in identifying which was which. So there's total concordance between what people recognize as these distinct regional areas. But of course we can interbreed happily, and so we are certainly all one species, and we are, as I said, if you look at the genes, we are very uniform genetically.
Yeah.
More uniform actually than chimpanzees, even from the same area. Chimpanzees are more variable than humans are right across the whole world, which is a remarkable fact because humans, as I said, look so different.
Why is that about humans? Why did we evolve so that we look so different from one another?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've speculated that it could be sexual selection, Darwin's other theory, I've speculated that it could be cultural xenophobia, maybe because people dislike members of the wrong tribe, they speak the wrong language, they have the wrong religion, so you don't interbreed with them. And so there could be a tendency for genetic divergence, which normally happens on geographically separated areas. I mean, islands that tend to
like Australia, where you had a really remarkably self-contained little world.
Yes, but culture, language, and religion, etc., tribal loyalties, make a kind of fictive island. Not anymore, but there might have been a time when, in our ancient history, where it was not done to mate with somebody from the wrong tribe.
Or we've also found out recently that when human beings moved around and they greeted another tribe that was already living there, they tended not to intermarry but to wipe them out. That in fact there was a lot of horrible murder of the other. But is there anything that we know? Because I've had Nicholas Wade on here and some other people, but we're talking about very subtle differences. But could those subtle differences have an impact in subtle ways around the world? Could it help, for example, in any way explain why East Asian countries have done so well in the last 50 years compared to other parts of the world? I don't know. I mean, I think cultural differences will do the job fine without going into genetics. That doesn't rule out genetic possibility of genetic differences. How do we? This is a bigger question. How do we juggle this mixture of genetics and culture in almost every human activity or human behavior? Both are involved in some way. How do we determine which is which, or can we?
Well, no. I mean, you can look at, never mind about culture, you can look at variation in things which I suppose might have an impact on culture, like, I don't know, musical ability or intelligence or mathematical ability or something like that. And you can partition the variance statistically, you can partition the variance between genes and environment. One of the ways of doing it, as you know, is by twin studies, where you compare monozygotic twins, identical twins, reared together, identical twins reared apart, fraternal twins reared together, fraternal twins reared apart. And by doing that, statistics on that, you can estimate a figure for the so-called heritability, which you think of as the contribution to the variance of genes. And it varies different things. I mean, something like intelligence has quite a high, something like sexual preference, whether you're gay, for example, has fairly high heritability, and other things don't. And obviously, things like which language you speak has a zero. I mean, that's entirely cultural. But this is a very complicated, involved, interesting, fascinating area, which is also much more controversial than it need to be.
Yes, because it seems to me that the interaction of genetics and culture, it's a dynamic thing. It can be dynamic. That understanding that relationship between the two is really the task of understanding human behavior, because we are a species with culture in a way that no other species is. We have brains far larger than any other species has, and yet we're also a mammal species. So we're going to have this fascinating combination of strong genetic influences, strong cultural influences, which creates the kind of... Now, for my worth, I think of that as diversity. That's how I think of diversity. That the world produces humans of so many different kinds, with so many different strengths and weaknesses, and it does so in this heritable way sometimes, and sometimes it just throws out someone who seems to have something remarkable to say. And yet people on the right are really terrified of talking about culture as something that forms people, and people on the left are terrified of genetics in ways that they needn't be, because they're terrified that they will find out that something about some group or other is not what they hoped it would be. As opposed to, like, we're humans, we live in this world, let's just try and understand it. Can we just see where one ends and the other begins, or how they interact?
I agree. I have no disagreement there.
Yeah, I just feel, I just read, for my sins, Judith Butler's new book, Who's Afraid of Gender? And for her to describe the sex binary as a function of white supremacy didn't exist before Europeans in the 18th century decided upon it. I throw my hands up in the air and I was like, why am I reading this? You're not
why are you reading this?
Well, I read it because I had to write a column. So I punched one out. But I've also been sort of fascinated by that project of divorcing humans from their natural state, or regarding nature in some ways as a threat. It seems to me that, for example, the sex binary seems to some people to be a threat to their own personal existence. So therefore it has to be banned. Of course it isn't a threat to your existence. It doesn't care about whether you exist or not, actually. And you are actually reflecting it in some way that you don't fully grasp. But don't try and tell me that what I'm looking at in front of my bloody eyes is not what I'm looking at with my... What's the worst religion currently in the world? I mean, there have been many over the years. And I don't think any particular faith can claim greater purity than others. But is there one particularly whose nature of intolerance, dogmatism, fanaticism...
well, I think obviously Islam.
Yeah. How compatible is that going to be with liberal Western democracy, in the secular democracy, in the medium to long run?
If you look at those countries which have Islamic governments dominated by mullahs, you have persecution of gays, you have persecution of women, you have a sort of persecution of apostates. I mean, the death penalty for ceasing to believe in the religion. This is major intolerance. And what is so paradoxical is the way the liberal left in Western countries has a sort of hands-off policy with respect to Islam, whereas they're quite willing to, we talked about this earlier, to criticize the same things in Christianity and in things like second-class status of women, which is terrible and rightly so in liberal circles. It's just part of the law in Islamic countries, and yet it gets overlooked. It gets a free pass.
Why do you think that? Is it because it's just related to the developing world? Brown people, therefore brown people good, white people bad.
I think it's confused with race, and many people think Islam is a race, and so they think that's total confusion, obviously.
Yeah, but there's also, I think there is also maybe I get you think that there is a prejudice against one's own. I mean, there seems to be this prejudice against Christianity because actually it's our faith. It was historically our faith.
Yes.
It comes with this sort of oikophobia of hatred of oneself, or one's own culture and civilization. Yeah. Have you in your life, because you've lived a good long life, my God. I mean, the fact, honestly, Richard, talking to you, you're 83, I'm just in awe. I expect to be a complete gibbering idiot by then. But looking at your lifetime, you have seen, for example, especially in the last 25 years, a clear decline in believers. You've even seen that in the United States, which was always the outlier. We've seen the biggest drop in believing Christians in America ever. Maybe that may be an exaggeration, because there have been other periods, but we've definitely seen something quite dramatic.
Yes.
And yet it seems to be allied with some pretty bad developments in the culture as well. Do you worry that when you take away the old school religion, people are going to turn ideologies into religions? They're going to turn to cult figures like Trump.
Yes.
They're going to become wokies because that's their way of imposing their will on the world.
I'm constantly being told this, and people are saying, well, if you get rid of religion, you're going to get something worse. And I get blamed sometimes for the sort of upsurge of ridiculous cults which are taking the place of religion, like the cult of all the 100 different genders and that kind of thing. G.K. Chesterton, who was, of course, a very religious man, said when people give up, something like when they give up religion, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. And I hate that, of course. I mean, I believe in the truth, and the truth means what there's evidence for. And so... But
you can see the argument that given people are going to believe things and want to believe things, this seems to be very deep in the human nature, that inevitably, maybe you could make an argument that some of the older religions at least had some pretty time-tested doctrines that were pretty socially beneficial overall, that instilled all sorts of values that actually were important to a liberal democracy, like equality and decency and being kind, and that maybe if we're always going to have religion, they might be better than our current replacements.
Possibly. It's not a bargain that I would strike. I prefer to go with truth. So if you tried to tell me, you wouldn't accept this, but if somebody said a benign falsehood is valuable if it keeps civil order, that kind of thing. If people believe, say they believe that if you do wrong, even if the police don't get you, God will. I could well be persuaded that could have benefits in terms of civil order, because the police can't be watching everybody all the time, obviously, thank goodness. And so to think that there's a sort of spy camera in the sky watching your every move could have, I won't say moral benefits, could have benefits in terms of good behavior. I wouldn't strike that bargain. To me, if it's false, it's false. And even if it does have benefits, have civil benefits, then it's not worth striking that bargain.
I absolutely understand that. And in fact, it was always my response to neoconservatives who was just like, well, best put as by an old Oxford Don who I knew, was that he said he is in favor of the Church of England because it's a bulwark against religion.
Yes. Who was that?
Oh, it was a man at Oxford called Leopold, what was his name? Hankford Strevens or something. He was a particularly a notoriously atheistic and hilarious person.
I remember the name, yes.
Frank Holford Strevens is his name.
That's right,
obviously off the charts in his intelligence, but also kind of crazy in many ways.
Yes.
I thought was a fantastic thing to say.
Yes. Well, I suppose I think of myself as a sort of cultural Anglican. I mean, I think there's a lot of decency in the sort of stereotypical parish vicar. They're always very nice people and very, very benign.
Now, do you think there could have been an evolutionary advantage to hunter-gatherer tribes that had instilled the God that could see you when you can't see other people?
Oh, I could well believe that. And also, of course, it's a time-honored way for dictators or high priests to exercise control, because they've got a hotline to God, and therefore they can tell the people what God wants.
Yeah, there's always that option too. Yes. The gays can also go and pretend to be straight because they're celibate, because they're monks. It had all sorts of advantages for various of us. What would gays have done without the Roman Catholic Church over the last 2 millennia? I don't know. Found something else to do, I guess.
You're going to have to go and confess that you said that.
I know. I'm terrible. Well, you have to understand, I don't know. I'm a bad Catholic. I guess that's the truth of the matter. I went to Mass last Sunday. You could definitely put me on the ropes if you were a severe, let's say, member of Opus Dei and wanted to quiz me on which aspects of the magisterium I 100% devoted myself to. But I'm Pope Francis Catholic in that sense. I think that the core of it is the imperative to love one another, to overcome the worst parts of one's nature, to hope for the life after death, to revere the memory of this man, and to hope that we will one day be reconciled with total reality, which is that this isn't just a meaningless journey into the dark. It is actually a bigger story.
It's not meaningless. It's a meaningful journey into the dark.
Okay. Let us go meaningfully into the dark.
The dark is, when you die, it's just like before you were born. It's not dark. It's just nothing. You weren't around when the dinosaurs were, and perhaps rather thankfully.
I wasn't around when Hitler was. I mean, it's amazing. It's random, right? But what makes you happy, Richard? What would be your perfect way of spending an afternoon?
Oh, you can't ask me that. I'm just an ordinary person. I have no interesting things to say about that.
Do you read,
like
garden, hang with your dog?
I do music. I like poetry, and I read. Yes.
What do you think of that poem, "O Bard" by Larkin, which is about what we just discussed, death?
I don't know it.
Oh, that's amazing. Please go check it out. "O Bard." It's in his collected. Aubade, because it's Larkin was not dissimilar in a way. He was an atheist, but he went to churches, and because he liked seeing old churches, and he had a certain kind of respect for what he called serious places, a serious house on serious earth. It is, he says. I think in church.
I love great cathedrals. I love great church music. I love Matthew Passion, B minor Mass, and I can go along with the sentiments of it in a way, although I don't believe it. It's because it's fiction. It's like reading a novel where you know the characters don't exist, never existed, but nevertheless they come alive for you in the book that you're reading, in the fiction. I
used to love going to Evensong at Oxford. Yes. I was in Magdalen, and they had this spectacular choir.
Oh, wonderful! Yes,
and just to be there, I don't think. Again, I think you're right. I don't think one has to believe in the Christian God to be transported by those experiences.
Right,
Richard. I'm so thrilled that you were able to come on here. I'm so grateful for the time. I've enjoyed it very much. I've enjoyed it immensely. I apologize again for my rather brusque thing I said a few weeks ago. It's really lovely to have gotten to know you, and thank you for your clarity in certain public debates, which you express so lucidly that it just diffuses things, in my opinion.
Well, thank you. That's very nice. Good. I've enjoyed talking to you very much.
Yeah, and this has been. I just hope when I'm 83, I'm still doing what you're doing, and have as much energy and clarity of mind that you have. So thank you very much for coming. And please check out Richard's, obviously his great books, The God Delusion, but also check out his Substack, The Poetry of Reality. Go check it out, subscribe, support A Voice of Reason.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can show some support by subscribing to the podcast, sharing it with your friends, and leaving a review.